Hi everyone, welcome to the Inner Game of Change podcast, where we focus on exploring the multi-layers of managing organizational change effectively. Our guests cover a diverse number of critical topics to enable change adoption, including communication, leadership, training, change practice, process design, change capability, and much more. My name is Ali Juma. Today, my guest is Jason Little to chat about his book, Lean Change Management, and other topics too. Jason is the founder of Lean Change Organization. I find Jason to be a passionate, authentic thought leader in the arena of lean and agile change with decades of experience and practice. In this podcast, Jason will share his views on managing agile and lean change, as well as practical approaches underpinned by true stories. I'm grateful to have Jason with me today. So Jason, thank you so much for being my guest at the Inner Game of Change podcast.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Jason, today I would like to talk about your book, Lean Change Management. I know you've written it a few years ago, and you've got a new book which we'll cover also. But take me back. What was the idea behind the book? Where did it all start?
So it started late 2000s or so. I was working in a large agile transformation, and I remember it was New Year's Eve day. I was sitting there, and this client, they have a building that's like the size of a city block, just massive building that I actually worked in a few years earlier as a IT person. So the company had sold it to another company. So it was kind of cool to come back 3-4 years later and work as an agile consultant there. And I think I hit a point where a lot of change agents hit, whereas, you've been there for 8 months and you just don't see things happening the way that you thought they would with the change. And the context was agile. And I just thought, something's missing. This agile thing is so simple. Why don't the people here get it? And I just started writing, and I wrote a blog post with some ideas. So that was the original seed of it. And then that evolved to a bunch of things over the next few years. And then the ideas were just basically waiting for a story to wrap themselves around. So the company in the book was the story. So yes. I originally wrote it a couple of years earlier, chapter by chapter, and released it on LeanPub. And then rewrote it and re-released it in 2014. Which he called the Commission. Yes.
Yeah, I like the Commission. And the Commission is a representation of the environment we work in nowadays. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Everyone here in Canada knows who the Commission is, but
well,
no one else does. Yeah.
Well, I figured it out. I mean, you made it very clear in your book, and in your book, before we come to the principle of lean change management, in your book, you talked about a lot of aha moments. Mm-hmm. You want to share some of them with us?
Most of it centered around the idea is we have this view of how we see change happening in our organizations, and we see it like a project that gets managed. We come up with a perfect plan, we create all the tasks, and then we go force it on people and then blame them for resisting if it doesn't work. Yep. But we don't, and all the while we're doing that, we're talking about how change is about people and all this type of stuff, but we are not behaving in a congruent way. So the real aha was, what would happen if we adjusted the pace of the change to the pace of change the organization has? And how could we bring in some elements of lean startup and design thinking and all the stuff I've been doing in agile coaching for the last decade before that into change?
Yes. So has it changed has the scene changed since you've started writing and applying those principles? Do you actually believe that there is a uniformed way that humans behave towards change and it's not going to change?
I think there's patterns for sure. I think when it comes to how we approach change in organizations, we forget that our organizations are social systems.
Yes.
Like if somebody moves in next door, nobody in their right mind Googles, give me a 12-step framework for integrating with the new neighbor that will guarantee successful ROI and maximum change output, right? We bring over a basket of fruit and say, hey, how's it going? But why do we forget everything about human interaction, relationships, social structures when it comes to changing organizations? So I think, as far as how it's evolved, it's been more about recognizing these patterns and being able to articulate how to work within all of these different patterns.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to think that humans behave in a predictable way. It never happens. That's why there's a book actually about nudge. It's called actually Customers or Consumers Misbehaving. I think you'd covered really an important topic, which is, can we problem focused or a solution focused? And I really like that and where it took us as well. But let me just go back to, so in a simple, description, can you just describe what lean change management is?
Lately, I've just been referring to it as a collection of action-biased ideas and philosophies that help you take one step forward at a time.
Yes. Okay. And is chunking the change, which is you release one and then you get feedback and then you move to the next stage. Chunking can be a disruptive process to organizations, especially when you get to the experimentation part of it. How do you convince leaders that only through this process that you can achieve a sustainable outcome?
I kind of like the idea from Disciplined Agile delivery, where they have this concept called enterprise awareness. So how do Agile teams become aware of the ecosystem they're operating within? So I like to use that same type of idea to help people and leaders understand that this change isn't the only thing going on. How do we synchronize this with what's happening right now? An example would be one company I worked in, they back to school and holiday. Those are their big business to consumer seasons. So in September is a horrible time to start a change program. So it's kind of like, how do you synchronize our change programs or projects with the natural rhythms in the organization so you create time and space for people? So not just making it just isolated about the change itself, but it's within a bigger ecosystem and we need to align things properly.
Yeah. And that alignment can help with minimizing resistance, maybe capitalizing on resources. You're basically saying there's a dance already happening, and how do you align yourself with that dance? Is that right?
Yep. Because it's pretty easy to go to resistance and say people are resisting. And it's not that people resist change or people resist being changed. It's just, I think sometimes we forget it's 100% of our focus as change people is the change, and it's probably 2% of everybody else, right? We need to recognize that what we label as resistance is how people are reacting to that foreign element, and that should be the focus, not the people who we think are resisting, but why did we get this type of reaction? What else is going on that is putting us in this spot?
Which you described in your book. I think the resistance is a symptom.
Yeah. All we can do is look at what that response is and try to figure out and try to make sense of it. Because we all do that.
Of course. Yeah, of course. I mean, it's a natural thing. A change is happening. You got to have to weigh up, is that going to be good for me or bad for me? Is it going to impact my status, my relationships, all of those things. You talked about neighbors coming next to us. I got to have to figure out, do I like them? Are they going to be annoying? Mm-hmm. And so we go through all of those things in our head, and that happens in the workplace. And I completely agree with you. Sometimes people say, leave everything at home and come to work, and which is a bit of a rubbish idea because it's all an extended social system. Mm-hmm. The power play is different, but the way we go about it is almost the same. From your experience, why would people resist change? Is it the leaders? Is it the complexity of the change? Is it the culture? What is it?
I think it's a bunch of factors. One is the surprise factor, where when a change is unleashed on people, it's the typical pattern I see is, the people all just say at the top, decide they want to do something for some reason, and they bring people like us in to go get other people to do that. So they've been thinking about this change and what they want for weeks, potentially months, and just expect it's going to go into execution mode. So the people on the teams that are ultimately have to change how they do stuff, it's going to take them just as long to understand and internalize what the intent of that is in the first place. And then the resistance comes into play when, well, we already did all the thinking for you people who are just the doers. Go do what we told you to do. It just doesn't work that way, because the people I've been on teams where I thought something was a good idea and a team member goes, oh, I can just add the script and it'll be done in like an hour instead of a week-long project. So there's just that disconnect of the desire of what is wanted from the people asking for the change versus the people who are ultimately affected by it might have a better idea. So we call them resistors, but they're just like, well, wait a minute. I have a better thought or a better idea, or I don't understand this. And we just tend to think we have to use Newtonian force to overcome them, which is not the case. We need more dialogue.
Yeah, I always find it tricky when you bring external people to the internal soldiers to say to them, these a better way. And probably there is a better way. But also I find sometimes that I talk to the internal people, and it takes me a while to build relationships to actually say to them, hey, I'm just a friend in here, and I don't want to take your job, or all I'm interested in is I'm going to help you be slightly better. But you are the SME in here. You know about your processes. But I quite find it sometimes that whatever we come up with after gathering insight and all of that, they've already thought about it. And and they say, well, we've been talking about this for ages. Now they're going to pay millions of dollars for the external people to tell us what we already were telling them. And that can create another level of, resistance to the leaders. Say, well, I've been talking about this for ages. Why haven't you listened to me? And I think it goes back to your point around, fair enough, the leadership wants to roll out a change, but invest in communicating that, hey, because we listened to you, you've told us that's what you want. We don't have current resources internally. We're going to get some bunch of people. They're going to work with you, and then they'll be guided by you. And then the leaders are responsible sometimes around the disruption in the organization.
Yeah, and I think sometimes there is responsibility on the change agent side when you're the external people coming in, because, it might not be a popular opinion, but there's a certain level of ego with being a high-priced consultant that can charge $5,000 a day to come and run a transformation, that, you come in with your fancy clothes and your fancy talk and you're the face of the transformation. That doesn't help. The attitude that I always take is, I am behind the scenes acting as a coach and facilitator for your change people. Nobody even needs to know I'm here. Yeah. Like, I'm not running your transformation meetings. I'm not front and center for this. I'm not going to splash my face and crap all over your intranet sites. And because then you get exactly the dynamic you described. Oh, this too shall pass. I mean, I pick on the Canadian banks a lot because they're easy to pick on. They've spent tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, on consulting fees for the last 10 years transforming to Agile, and they're still doing it. So the people on the teams do exactly what you described. Well, now instead of company X telling us this stuff that we should have did 10 years ago, company Y is in here doing this. So I think there's more responsibility on the change consultants to try to work with leaders to help them see that, how many times have you done this before? What worked well? What didn't work well? How did you execute it? What were the patterns like? How did people react to it? What benefits did you get? Like, start from a place of, let's not just keep running 18-month transformation programs with a different set of consultants over and over again, getting the same results. So, and I guess the challenge with that is, and I can speak personally from this, it limits the amount of business you'll get. I've turned away or not accepted business where it's been a case of, come in with your plan and tell us how to do it. And I say, that's just ain't going to work. So no, thank you.
Spot on. Actually, just today, Jason, I said no to an organization that wanted me to go with a really great daily rate. It's like, where do I sign when you see that daily rate? But they've given me 8 weeks to transition a change, and
Yikes.
8 weeks, and I'm thinking, no, money is important, but I'm not going to enjoy it. You're not going to get the results. I know you are in a hurry, but please go somewhere and then think about this. Because you're not going to get, you might get it, which you called, I think, what is it? The red zone in your hack and crack and hack and, the red zone. You can do it and you can force it on people. But how sustainable will that be? I don't know. I'm really unsure. So actually, just today, and it's a really great point that you mentioned that sometimes it's our responsibility also to educate the market and actually say no. And I know that is really hard, but I do believe, and I actually was talking about this to another guest in my podcast, I do believe that we have a responsibility when we come from outside for a short period of time, or we behave differently when we are a permanent member of the organization. They're completely two different behaviors. If you are an internal permanent member, I think it's good to be out and about actually talking about and promoting the change. But you are right. When you are an external person, you are more of an enabler rather than an active player in the environment in there. So the model is we gather insight, we understand the problem, then we explore options. And part of the options you talked about is you look at the value versus cost versus how disruptive the change will be. So how do you work that out? Do you work it with based on the budget, as in the cost? How do you go about those things? And because sometimes we don't really know how disruptive the change will be, even though we've done all our diligence around the impacts.
Yep. A good part of trying to figure out that cost is what's the smallest experiment we could run to validate this is a good option. So we might not, execute that option in its entirety. We might want to run some smaller experiment to validate with the people impacted that, for me, it might not seem like a big deal, but for people on teams who have a fixed date, fixed scope, fixed budget project they have to release in the next 2 months, it's huge for them.
Sure.
So how do we go and validate that? The cost versus value is one of a few different ways of categorizing those options. And it doesn't need to be too scientific at the start, because cost can mean a bunch of things. Like I've had situations where there's 8 VPs in this division with this company, and all of them are fighting for the next SVP job because they know if the SVP is going to be retiring in a year. So I know there's competition between all 8. So the cost of aligning them around their agile transformation is going to be extremely high, because I know that there's going to be political whatever happening there.
Yes.
And I can't quantify that. And obviously that's something you probably don't want to talk about with them. I do, but cost is not just monetary stuff. If you have to buy a tool or whatever to run like a globally distributed lean coffee, sure, that's cost as well. But for me, it can also mean how many horizontal or vertical boundaries do you need to cross in the organization to make this option work? Because it just takes a lot of time.
If you experiment with, let's just say, an MVP, or I think you described it as an MVC, if you experiment and things don't work, is there a risk around the solution? Because people immediately, the impacted people, might hear that it did not work. So is it upon us to actually explain that this is an experimentation, and with you as the impacted group, we'll figure out if it's going to work, and if it's not going to work, the feedback is going to come from you, and so we start building that. Is that how important is communication here when we experiment?
For me, it's building the experiments with the people that are going to be affected by them. So the experiment, the time we'll need to run it, what the leading, lagging diagnostics and measurements are, is really up to the people on the team to figure it out, and we're here for support. So it's basically if whatever we think will happen in this experiment, if it does happen, great. If it doesn't happen, we don't go to a place of, well, the team came up with it, so it's on them.
Sure. Yeah.
We also talk about the timing and the visibility of a failure to the experiment.
Yeah.
If it's, had some teams where the leaders want them to transition from waterfall to agile or whatever. And a few teams I've worked with, they're under a mission critical release for something. So I don't even start the experiment. I go back to the leaders and say, this is not a good time. You probably don't want them to completely change how they work while they're trying to deliver something that could either cost the company a lot of money if they don't make it,
sure,
or cause a lot of customer problems. So let's not even start the experiment.
Yeah.
But that dialogue happens with the people who are affected by it.
And sometimes when you experiment and you expect a level of feedback, you gotta have. I actually talked to a leader just today saying to a couple of their change champions, if you would like them to add value and really give you feedback, give them a space and time in their daily calendar to actually do those things. Because they're already stressed work-wise, and then we're asking them discretionary effort on top of that. So if I give them a bit of a time, then they will feel that, okay, I need to really think, deeply about this, rather than I just want to do it for the sake of doing it, and it just becomes a bit of a chore rather than, God, do I need to give this feedback now because I'm really busy with my customers? But if I give them a couple of hours a week just to spend on this, I think it will be worthwhile. Mm-hmm. So again, that's part of managing the change, is that give them space and time to really understand it, which some organizations understand that, and some organizations are already stretched resource-wise, so they can't release that those resources, and that can help. That can help a lot. Talk to me about the lean coffee experiment. I really like it, and I would like the audience to know about it.
That was a situation I think pretty much every change person has found themselves in at some point.
Yes.
You start either as an employee or you start as the consultant, and they say, hi, welcome to day one, go change things. And you're like, all right, Where should I go? Should I change the coffee machine? So for me, I just thought, well, I need focus. I need to know what's going on. What are people talking about? I already knew we were 2 months into the change in the first place. So it was still pretty early on, and I decided the best thing to do was just to put up a sign with, we're going to do a lean coffee thing. This company I knew was very regimented on start end times, being public sector. So thou shalt start work at 8:30, thou shalt finish work at 4:30, or whatever it was. So I made sure it was at a time that was compatible with those working hours. Put signs up by the elevators so people could see it, and then waited to see who showed up. And then my measurements were, what departments are people coming from? What questions do they have? The key with lean coffee is having a theme. So on the sign, it just said, bring any questions about our transformation, anything Agile related, Kanban related, or anything else related to this transformation program. And that's what we're going to chat about. And we just kept doing it every 2 weeks and started looking for patterns. And a bunch of people showed up, a lot of business analysts showed up. So we spent a lot of time with that group, helping them with Agile stuff. Somebody from the PMO showed up, which is like the holy grail. Well, back then it was the holy grail for Agile people at the time, because nobody was doing Agile PMO stuff. And then we started doing executive sponsored lean coffees, because the execs found out how much people liked it. And they said, oh, well, let's rotate all the executives through that and find out what's going on. And that was a case of, it's impossible to say, had we gone back and planned a communication strategy, we would have got the same result, or we would have got a different result. But the whole idea was, the effort to put the signs up was 5 minutes, and the payoff was something we couldn't possibly have planned our way through.
Was a success because it was not forced, it was optional? Did you play to the curiosity of people? Was it because nobody's done it before, so that was a new thing? So that's, again, is that as a result of you really understanding the environment and the playing conditions, and then you decided simplicity is key here?
In hindsight, yes to all of that. At the time, it was, I don't know where to focus my energy. And this is the easiest thing I can think of, to start having conversations with people as opposed to walking up to strangers' desks and saying, "Hey, how's it going? I'm Jason, the Agile coach.
Yes.
How's the Agile stuff going?" So it was a little bit of both. I think people felt they were being listened to, because just the nature of running a lean coffee, it's not like the coffee chats you hear batted around in traditional change circles, because those are preceded typically. It actually is, if they wanted to talk about cats, we would have talked about cats. So I think they really felt heard, not just listened to.
Was management interested?
At the beginning, no, we didn't even tell anybody at all. It wasn't even on the radar until water cooler conversations started happening and people were talking about how cool this format was. And then managers would start like, "Hey, how could we use that in our meetings?" And that's when it got the notice of the executives, and they're just like, "These sound like, people are really talking about this. What is it? How do we use it? And can we support it?"
Yeah.
Which was great.
Yeah, well done. I really like it. And I spent a lot of time thinking about it and about how do you harness this curiosity, but you've already thought about, I'm going to do it in their own time, so that there's no pressure on them. When somebody chooses to come to a session, that means inherently they are interested and open, and that will help build relationships already. And if they've done it once, they might come back again because they might have a different. And then if they like it, then they go and tell other people. Yep. And so it's a bit of a small revolution within a company. And but I took a poetical liberty to it, and I actually modified it quite a few times in different situations, and it always works. And I asked my son the other day actually to use it at school. I asked him to just have a whiteboard and ask people about, give me some words, and he'll write it, and then it creates a discussion. And I said to him, I'm pretty sure you will have a pattern of words somewhere about your class. And anyway, I could not convince him, Jason. He refused. Completely refused.
He was resisting change.
Resisting change. I think he was anxious, and and he thought that was going to embarrass him. We have a lot of models. We've got the ProSci, we've got Kota, we've got quite a few of them. How relevant are they nowadays, Jason?
There's relevant bits from all of them. I think much of what we talk about in the traditional change world predates the internet.
Yes.
Right? So it's designed in a totally different era, and it's become as popular as it's become because there's still lots of enterprises that really don't, like, look at the Fortune 50. Do they really need to change? I mean, people will say, the average lifespan of the corporation is shrinking, blah, blah, blah. But you look at the banks here in Canada that have been transforming forever, they're going to keep using these tried and true methods and approaches that aren't really doing anything, but it makes them feel good. So I guess that's okay. So I think there is relevant bits. And I think, and there's parts that just don't make any sense anymore. Like urgency for change is a concept that for me has never made a lot of sense because it's biased from the perspective of the organization.
Yeah, true.
Like this change is urgent because we need to increase shareholder value. So I'm a tester on a team. Why do I care if I make a bunch of rich people more money? How do we flip the conversation towards having a purpose or a cause to rally around versus urgency?
Yes, yep. And then, great point. A purpose-driven is better than there's a burning platform. I mean, every time people use the burning platform analogy, I cringe because nobody's dying.
Yes.
There's no fire, so don't dramatize it. Change is already hard, so don't make it more difficult. Yeah.
I despise that term. Every time I hear it or talk about it, I'm just like, if anybody's still using this, please stop, because people don't realize it's actually where it came from. It literally is a burning platform.
It is a burning platform. I know, and it's a terrible thing. There's actually a lot of leadership lessons in there which I don't like anyway. And so I'm glad we are on the same wavelength in there. I just focus a lot on the power of words and how we need to invest a lot of time, not really spinning it, but say it in a simple way and say it for what it is, rather than using big words, like a burning platform or creating an urgency. I'm with you. I have, first of all, there's a lot of urgency that is already pushing a company, so you don't need to create that. But again, urgency is a biased term, because who decides what urgency is? But purpose-driven, and it's kind of funny because my career now, I was always working in a capitalist companies, and I like their pace, and I like all of that, until I dipped my toes into a state government, which is like public service. And I loved it, and I never looked back. Now I focus on how can I work more on projects on public service, because I can see the purpose and the value of this, rather than, and I can see that if there's urgency, it's actually driven by the community, and we need to respond to it. So I like that. I reckon, for me, the way I think about those models, they need an upgrade. They need to think about, we are going into a digital revolution now, and it's really up on them. I mean, Kotta has already released another book, which is another kind of an upgrade to it. But you're right. I think we can. There are some elements in it. The ADCA element is in PROSA is more or less still applicable. There is the one thing that I focus on, and I'm curious about what you think, is the training aspect. So once we gather insight, get some options, we experiment, and then we've got a reasonably working solution. How do we, in ADCA, it's called the knowledge to ability, and that's the training transfer. How do you manage that? Like, how did that work for you in sort of an agile environment?
It's more on demand. It's less linear, and it doesn't make the assumption that everybody goes through those same phases at the same time. Like, people don't progress through awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, reinforcement in a linear way at the same time in the same way.
No.
But we align it that way because it's easier to manage the project when it's that way, but it never, ever works that way. So for me, it's on demand. One company, we went from 0 to 200 agile teams within a year. For example, we started from teams that we called the movers. So we basically put it out there to say, here's what our coaching team can help you with, who's in. So we had a very simple, we pitched it, sometimes you got to think like a marketer. So it was basically, you're going to go from nothing to ready to start your agile project in 3 days. Complete backlog, team liftoff, team working agreements, all that stuff within 3 days. And people were like, holy crap, that takes us like 5 months to do here. How are you going to do that? So we got the people interested, and they kind of went through like a micro transformation in the context of the bigger transformation. Then when we moved on to the next set of teams, we approached them like trainers, not like coaches. So we're going to mechanically show you how this stuff works. Oh, by the way, here's team 1. They've been doing this for 6 months. Let's talk to them. So it's more of like, some people will call it rolling wave or incremental or iterative, whatever you want to call it. We just
episodic.
Yeah, we killed the assumption that the idea of sending people to like a 3-day training and then say, hey, you've been trained on this change, now go do it, has never worked. I think now we're just at a point where we can actually say it never worked, because we can't afford that anymore.
Yeah. I think, well, I think it makes sense that if I do it in a sort of episodic way, on demand, and create the environment that will make it easier for them to actually learn, um, and give it time. I often find that we spend a lot of time in the readiness and the analysis and all of that stuff, and spend a small amount of time at the end to train, and then we close the project.
Yeah.
And I think we need to think about how we can make the tail a little bit longer as part of the scope and as part of the plan, rather than we train them and then we move on. And because the tail is probably far more important than the beginning of the, like every stage is important, but you spend a lot of time designing and experimenting, and there's a lot of resource and cost to it. I think it's only worthwhile to actually invest a little bit longer time to embed that change and actually help people acquire the knowledge that you want them to acquire.
Mm-hmm. And we need to recognize different teams need different things, and that completely breaks the corporate like change readiness training approach. So, we basically we don't commit to a fixed set of scope as externals. It's basically you're buying a block of time. We don't care what the scope is. That we know that's going to change over time. So we'll go into one team and we'll run a liftoff with them, and the strategy is a beginnings and ends approach. And what I mean by that is if the teams are trying to change how they work, and typically they're going to bring in agile or Kanban or design thinking or whatever, there's cadences and there's ceremonies and there's rhythms. So if they're using Scrum, they've got a sprint planning and a sprint review and sprint retrospective in weekly chunks or 2 weekly chunks. So we intervene at the beginning and the end to help them. So we coach and train in those sessions on demand when they need it. So some teams might need more help with ideation or paper prototyping or design thinking. So wham, we help them with that. Other teams might not even have the basics of how to break work into chunks that they can deliver every week. So we focus more on that instead. And that is very difficult and stressful for the change people. But it also means your change people really need to have their together, and they really need to accept the fact that if I'm not the right person, I'll tag in the other change person because they've got the skills and the knowledge for this, instead of just saying like, here's the card of things that you have to learn, and even if they're not relevant.
Yeah, great point. Similar to, because we talk a lot about customize your communication based on the audience. So you're talking about is customize your training based on your audience as well, which may mean more investment. It might be easier for a change practitioner or an organization to create one training pack and then everybody goes through that, rather than the other way, which is which pack is applicable to which group to get the best value out of it. Let me go back to, you mentioned in your book these I think you've really articulated that well, and the difference between change and transformation. When we focus on fixing problems, that is change. When we focus on solution, that is transformation. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's kind of like past versus future thinking. If we say transformation, the visions of the caterpillar turning into a butterfly immediately pops into people's brains. But any biologists that are listening will know what a horrible process that is. Right? Yeah. Like the caterpillar destroys itself. It breaks down its entire cell structure to turn into something different. That's transformation. And I've only ever honestly worked with one multinational organization that took that approach, where there was no let's capture the current state, future state, and transition, or let's do an analysis on how things worked. And they said, this is the future. Boom. Any barricades, plow it down. I don't want to hear we can't do that because of this, that, and the other. They agreed that transformation meant we're going to go to this goal, and whatever obstacle is there, we'll change it and just plow through it. And change is more being mindful of the constraints we're up against. So changing within a set of constraints that we're not willing to break right now. So with a lot of the banks here in Canada, their constraint is basically, at the agile transformation, it's an IT thing.
Yeah.
We're not going to change how we fund teams. We're still going to use project-based funding with very much a lot of heavy front-loaded project management stuff before we authorize the project and stuff. But they've chosen to live in those constraints. So let's not call those transformation, because we know that's not it. Let's just call it process improvement. And somehow Agile's made that a bad word. And I've worked with a lot of clients where I say, if that's what you think is best, let's do it. Like, let's not beat ourselves up and have to talk about transformation and changing behaviors in this when we really just want to have 5 processes instead of 10. That's fine. That's awesome. Let's do it.
Yeah. Let's do it. Is the word transformation, is that, I was talking to from a friend of mine the other day, and then I was thinking about it. We are in the middle of pandemic now. Mm-hmm. It's the biggest disruptor, and we're seeing our governments trying to do change management, and mm-hmm. most of them fail. So when we talk about transformation now, do you think it's a good time to still keep talking about transformation? When we are in the middle of very disruptive time, because the word transformation can give the connotation that this is going to be damn hard.
I think the word is meaningless. 10 years ago it meant something. Now it doesn't matter, because every company is doing a digital or agile transformation or some kind of transformation. So it's just a meaningless phrase. Something will replace it. And then that something will become meaningless 10 years from now too, because that's just how the business world works.
Yeah.
I think with the pandemic, it's given some companies a chance to question their purpose and how they do things, and really focus on the employee experience and making things better. If I use the Canadian government as an example, they had a program for small businesses, basically, where within the span of 2-3 weeks, any small business in Canada would get a $40,000 loan. And the entire program, start to finish, took about 2 weeks. So one day you log into your online bank and it says, hey, the government has this new program for here, put in your name and your email address and your business number, hit submit, and within a day you get your $40,000. Like, normally it would take them 5 years to create a program like that. So I think the gigantic social interruption that was COVID forced a lot of more traditional companies to realize they can be adaptive to the market and they can create meaningful change, because they were forced into a situation to have to do it.
Yeah. And they see the benefit as well. Immediate benefits. But also, I think what COVID has uncovered that the workforce expectation is now different.
Yes,
especially when the
balance of power has shifted.
The balance of power, especially when we've been working remotely, we expect different things now. Where do you think that is taking organizations?
I think it will make competition for people increase, because I think, and I've known a lot of people who are running like global transformation programs, like highly skilled, super, super smart people working in these like massive companies. This was their opportunity to say, hey, you know what? I could use my talents for something more meaningful. And a lot of the ones I know left, like, they felt chained to their organization, and now they realized I can work with anybody from anywhere, anytime. Mm-hmm. And I think the problem that creates for companies is now they have to focus more on employee experience. They have to not bend to the will of the employees, obviously, but like Apple obviously isn't, right? Apple's, nope, you're all coming back to the office. If you don't like it,
yeah.
And they're taking a lot of heat for it.
Yeah.
But my view is it's their company. If you don't like it, don't work there.
Yeah. Well, that's a different philosophy. Is that, and that's exactly what Apple is doing. Is that I'm giving you the options, but you've got the option to leave if you don't like it. And yeah,
for sure.
So which is people, but because I reckon there'll be a lot of organizations that will be like Apple. In Australia here, I think we are finding a way around it, and nobody's willing to make a decision. I think all major companies and banks, they're watching each other. and then see who's going to make the first move.
Yeah.
You talked about the employee experience. How important is that going forward when we talk about business change? So is that going to be part of the success factor for managing change going forward? Because I call it the change experience.
Yeah, it's hard to say. For me, I think just the patterns of that's a topic that we have to focus on now. We have to focus on things like what I'd like to see with remote is let the teams decide, right? Like it's if a company wants to have a policy that says thou shalt be in the office, it's absolutely their right to do it, and we need to respect that. We also need to question it, but companies that can say things like we don't care, we have objectives to meet. Teams, you can decide. A friend of mine that works for one of the insurance companies here, that's what their team does. Because a lot of people moved outside of the city of Toronto during the pandemic because prices just went through the roof for housing. And now the teams are the ones deciding, okay, every Tuesday is our planning day. Everybody go into the office on Tuesdays, then you can go work wherever you want. We don't care. So getting away from the idea that you've worked your 40 hours, therefore you were productive, and more towards OKRs or objectives and stuff, giving people the option to manage their teams for what makes more sense for them. That will lead to business results.
Yeah, and look, I mean, it's quite disruptive. So, because your performance management structure and system will be challenged, because I don't need to see you to see the value of your work. The principle of engagement will be challenged. And how we measure it. And so it's an interesting time that we're going through. But for me, I mean, I work in the business of, I love the uncertainty, so I enjoy it because there's a level of creativity and keeps the options open. For me, I keep an eye, and then I think it becomes a personal preference. Personally, I would like to be in the office, and I would like to talk to people face to face, and I would like to catch up for coffee, and that's how I learn. And in fact, this podcast was an idea in response to I can't talk to a lot of people, so I'm going to talk to my peers and my professionals and the people that I admire and the books that I like, and so that's how the whole idea behind the Inner Game of Change started. Is that I really wanted to talk and share the thoughts, and I'm grateful for the many people who actually accept to come and talk to me. Jason, you've got a second book.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about it in maybe 5 words.
Oh,
so what is it called?
Change Agility.
Yeah.
It's focused on 3 main themes. Change how you think about change, how to work smarter with agile teams, and manage your change, work smarter with agile practices. Nice. I actually wrote it in a week in 2019 or so, I think 2018, 2019. And it was just sitting on a backup drive. So I was cleaning up a backup drive one day and I'm like, what the heck is this? I opened it up and went, oh, well, I'll run it through Grammarly and hit release. And that was it. And release. So that's why it's called a beta. It's released as a beta because it's supposed to be, the idea is our change plans can never possibly be perfect. It just can't happen that way. So the idea was the book isn't either. The book is like, how do you look at things differently? And if people want to find a typo and go, it's a horrible book because there's a typo in there, great, then stop doing change work. This is not your thing. If that's what you're going to focus on, you're not focusing on the right thing.
Yeah.
So it was designed, and it's a workbook basically. So it gives you a bunch of activities and exercises to really shift how you think about and look at change.
I look forward to having you back here and we discuss that particular book. I like the approach, Jason. You released a book in an agile way, minimal, viable book.
Yeah, exactly.
the principle of writing a book, actually, I mean, why do you write?
It's more or less to just formulate my own thoughts, and just it's a way for me to verbally think through stuff and think through ideas.
Yeah. And that's I started writing articles, and then only to realize that it's another way of, because it forces you to do research. It forces you to articulate your thoughts in a way that will make it easier for people to read, which will help you ultimately be able to speak better when you talk about change or principles as well. So, I love it. And the same with my podcast. It forces me to read books. And I read more articles about the people that I'm meeting. And in that way, I'm learning. And I hope that the listeners will pick up a couple of ideas. If one idea is they can pick up from this podcast, will be great. But we're coming to the end of the podcast, Jason. Can you just summarize your thoughts around where change management is going over the next couple of years?
I think it's going to actually just stay the course. I mean, you've probably seen everything come and go in the change world, right? Like this whole agile change thing, it's going to run its course.
Yeah.
People will forget about it, and they're going to move on to the next thing whenever the next thing comes out, because that's just the nature of how ideas evolve. I think the one thing that I hope will change is global change community will become more congruent. And what I mean by that is, we talk about how it's always about the people. Let's bring the humanity back into change. But here's a bunch of templates for you to fill out. That's not congruent. So I hope we actually move towards bringing humanity back into doing change work.
Fantastic. The humanistic change management. So that can be a title for your next book, Jason. Jason, I'm very grateful for your time. How do people reach you?
Leanchange.org is probably the best way, or just Google me. I'm pretty much everywhere. So I'm easy to find.
Now you're famous. That's why I'm happy to have you. It's been a pleasure having you, Jason. I will put all the information about how people can reach you in details in the podcast. And I hope to get you back to talk about your other book. I hope you stay well and stay safe.
Yeah, you too. Thanks very much for having me. It was fun.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode with Jason Little. To know more about Jason and this podcast, check the innergameofchange.com.au website. To receive more podcasts, simply subscribe. In our next podcast, we will meet with another change management specialist who will share their thoughts and ideas on change practice, communication, and learning. Until then, stay well and stay safe.